After one, Richard Whitmore brought his mistress to his wife's 60th birthday party and told the staff to remove his wife's name card from the head table. The ballroom went silent before the band even noticed. Charlotte Whitmore stood beneath a chandelier made of falling crystal, one hand resting lightly on the stem of a champagne glass she had not tasted. She was a tall white woman with silver blonde hair swept into a smooth twist, gray-blue eyes, and the kind of calm face people mistook for softness until they tried to push too far. Across the marble floor, her husband walked in holding another woman's hand. The woman was young enough to be mistaken for his daughter, if not for the way she leaned into him. She was white, golden-haired, slim, polished, and deliberate. Her red dress cut through the sea of navy suits and pearl necklaces like a fresh wound. A diamond bracelet glittered on her wrist. Charlotte recognized the bracelet. She had bought it in Paris 28 years earlier. Richard had told her it was being repaired. Beside Charlotte, her daughter Emma made a small, strangled sound. "Mom." Charlotte did not turn. Richard smiled as if nothing in the world was wrong. He moved through the staring guests with his public face on, the one he used for investors, charity boards, and newspaper photographs. Confident, warm, expensive. The mistress smiled too. Not nervously, victoriously. A waiter near the head table looked trapped, holding 2 place cards in his white-gloved hands. "Mrs. Whitmore," he whispered, "I am sorry." Mr. Whitmore's assistant said there had been a seating change. Charlotte looked down. One card read Charlotte Whitmore. The other read Ava Sinclair. Her husband's mistress had been placed beside him. Charlotte had been moved 3 seats away, between a city councilman who smelled of cigars and Richard's golf partner, who had once asked her if she still handled little household things now that the company was large. Emma reached for the card. "I will fix this." Charlotte closed her fingers over her daughter's wrist gently. "No," she said. "Leave it." Emma stared at her. "Leave it?" Charlotte's eyes stayed on Richard. He had just lifted Ava's hand to greet a group of donors. The gesture was careful enough to look accidental and intimate enough to wound. "Yes," Charlotte said softly. "Let him finish setting the stage." Emma's face changed. She knew that tone. Richard did not. For 34 years, Richard Whitmore had believed his wife was quiet because she was afraid of noise. He thought she had stayed behind him because she lacked the appetite to stand in front. He thought the woman who balanced his books at a kitchen table, raised his children, hosted his clients, and signed the early loans was too sentimental to protect herself. That was his first mistake. His second was bringing Ava Sinclair to a room filled with everyone who had watched Charlotte build his life. His third was believing this party belonged to him. Richard reached the head table with Ava beside him. He kissed Charlotte on the cheek. The kiss landed cold and dry near her ear. "Happy birthday, darling," he murmured. Ava's perfume followed him, sweet and sharp. Charlotte looked at him, then at Ava. "Richard," she said, "you brought a guest." His smile tightened for a fraction of a second. "Ava is important to the future of Whitmore development. I thought tonight was the right moment to introduce her properly." Properly. The word almost amused Charlotte. Ava extended a hand. "Charlotte, I have heard so much about you." Charlotte looked at the hand, then at the bracelet. "So have I," she said. Ava's smile flickered. Richard cleared his throat. "Let us not make this uncomfortable." Charlotte set her untouched champagne on the table. "You did that when you changed my seat." A pause opened around them. Several guests near the table pretended to look at flowers. Nobody left. People rarely walked away from a collision before impact. Richard lowered his voice. "This is not the time." Charlotte looked at the ballroom, the cake, the family portraits projected on the far wall, the employees who had come in their best clothes, the investors who owed her more than they remembered, the 2 grown children standing on opposite sides of an earthquake. "No," she said. "It is exactly the time." Richard's eyes narrowed. Before he could answer, their son Oliver stepped between them. Oliver was 40, handsome in his father's way, with the same strong jaw and the same trained smile. He worked in corporate consulting and had spent years trying to see both sides of every fire, even when one side was holding matches. "Mom," he said quietly. "Please. Not tonight." Charlotte looked at her son. Oliver swallowed. "There are employees here. Partners. Reporters. Whatever this is, we should handle it privately." Emma turned on him. "Are you serious?" "I am trying to protect the family." Charlotte's face did not move, but something behind her eyes cooled. "The family," she said. Oliver looked ashamed, but he did not step back. Ava watched the exchange with barely hidden satisfaction. Richard exhaled, relieved. Your mother understands discretion. She always has. Charlotte heard the insult under the compliment. Discretion, in Richard's mouth, meant silence that served him. She lifted Ava's place card and held it between two fingers. Then she placed it neatly beside Richard's plate. Enjoy dinner, she said. Richard blinked. You're being reasonable? Charlotte smiled. That frightened Emma more than anger would have. I am being patient, Charlotte said. Then she walked to the seat they had assigned her, sat down with perfect posture, and let the room watch her. After 6 months earlier, Charlotte had found the first receipt. Not lipstick on a collar. Not a secret message lighting up at midnight. Richard was too polished for sloppy evidence. It was a wire transfer hidden inside a vendor reconciliation file. Ava Sinclair's strategic image, $85,000. Charlotte had been reviewing old company records from her home office because the Whitmore Foundation had planned to fund a new waterfront arts complex. Richard wanted Whitmore Development to handle the project, naturally. He always said naturally, when he meant no one should ask questions. Charlotte had asked questions anyway. She had always been good with numbers. Before Richard became the face of a regional real estate empire, Charlotte had been the one who kept the company alive. At 27, she had inherited a quiet fortune from her grandmother, Eleanor Caldwell, a shipping heiress who trusted banks less than she trusted weather. The money sat in a private trust under Charlotte's maiden name. Richard knew about the trust. He did not know its size. He knew it had helped secure the first loan for Whitmore Development. He did not know Charlotte's attorney had converted that help into voting control after Richard nearly bankrupted the business in year 3 chasing a luxury condo project with no permits. To the world, Richard owned Whitmore Development. On paper, the Eleanor Caldwell Legacy Trust controlled 52% of the voting rights through a structure Richard had stopped reading after Charlotte told him it was just estate planning. That was another thing Richard underestimated. Paper. Charlotte had built her life on it. Loan documents, vendor ledgers, payroll reports, board minutes, tax filings, prenuptial amendments, quiet clauses that waited years before becoming loud. The transfer to Ava Sinclair bothered her because Ava's company had not existed 90 days before the payment. It bothered her because the invoice described executive reputation transition strategy. It bothered her because the bank memo listed Richard's private approval code, not the finance department's. So Charlotte searched. The second payment was $120,000. The third bought a lease on a penthouse near the harbor. The fourth paid for jewelry. The bracelet. Charlotte did not confront Richard that day. She printed everything, placed the documents in a blue folder, and called her lawyer, Beatrice Vale. Beatrice answered with the crisp voice of a woman who had never wasted a sentence in her life. Tell me it is taxes, Beatrice said. It is my husband. Worse than. Charlotte looked at the wire transfer. I think he is using company money to fund an affair. Beatrice went silent just long enough for the air to change. Do you have proof of the affair or proof of the money? The money. Good. Start there. Affairs make people emotional. Money makes judges listen. Over the next 3 months, Charlotte gathered proof with the patience of a woman who had spent decades hosting dinners for people she did not like. She learned that Ava Sinclair was 38, a public relations consultant with a carefully edited online life and a talent for standing near wealthy men in photographs. She had joined Whitmore Development as an outside image strategist during a hotel redevelopment campaign. Within weeks, she was traveling with Richard. Within months, she was sitting in private meetings where Charlotte's name appeared on funding documents. Beatrice hired a forensic accountant. The accountant found routed payments, inflated consulting invoices, luxury travel labeled as investor outreach, and a draft restructuring plan that would have moved voting control from the Caldwell Trust into a new family governance entity chaired by Richard. Charlotte read the plan at 2 a.m. in the same kitchen where she had once packed school lunches. It contained one sentence that made her hand go still. Charlotte's emotional attachment to the marriage can be leveraged during anniversary and birthday events to obtain ceremonial consent. Ceremonial consent. That was what Richard thought her life was. A ceremony. A smile. A signature. A woman in pearls standing beside him while he took what remained. 2 weeks later, Emma found her mother sitting in the garden with a stack of papers in her lap and no coat, even though the wind had turned cold. Mom, what is going on? Charlotte looked up. For one moment she almost lied. Mothers learn to protect their children from storms, even when the storm is their father. Then she thought of Ava's invoices. of Richard's plan, of the birthday party scheduled for June. Your father is having an affair, Charlotte said, and I believe he is trying to use it to take control of the company. Emma sat down hard on the stone bench. She did not ask if Charlotte was sure. That was how Charlotte knew her daughter had already seen something. I saw them at the Monroe's Hotel, Emma whispered. Charlotte closed her eyes. I am sorry, Mom. You did not do it. I should have told you. Charlotte reached for her hand. You were trying not to break my heart. Emma's eyes filled. He was already breaking it. A week later, Charlotte called Oliver. He listened. He frowned. He asked for evidence. She gave him enough to understand, not enough to endanger the case. When she finished, Oliver rubbed his forehead. Mom, Dad has done terrible things if this is true. We need to be careful. The company employs hundreds of people. Charlotte looked at the son she loved. There it was again. The company. The family name. The public damage. Everything except the woman in front of him. Oliver, she said, if someone steals from a house, do we protect the house by handing him the keys? He looked away. I just do not want everything destroyed. Neither do I, Charlotte said. That is why I am finally protected, like a coronation. He chose the hotel, the menu, the orchestra, the guest list. He insisted on inviting business partners Charlotte barely knew and city officials she had no interest in entertaining. He ordered a video montage of their marriage, filled with pictures where he stood in the center and she stood slightly behind him. Charlotte let him. Every time he asked for her opinion, she gave a mild answer. Lovely. Whatever you think. That sounds appropriate. He mistook cooperation for surrender. Ava did not. 3 days before the party, Charlotte received a message from an unknown number. A photo appeared first. Ava in a dressing room mirror, wearing a red gown. On her wrist was Charlotte's diamond bracelet. The caption read, Richard says red makes a woman impossible to ignore. Charlotte stared at the screen for a long time. Then another message came. I hope Saturday will not be too difficult for you. Change is easier when everyone accepts it gracefully. Charlotte forwarded the messages to Beatrice. Beatrice replied, generous of her. Charlotte typed back, she thinks it is a threat. Beatrice, it is an exhibit. On the morning of the party, Charlotte sat at her vanity while Emma fastened pearl earrings at her mother's ears. Do you want to cancel? Emma asked. Charlotte met her daughter's eyes in the mirror. No. Are you sure? Your father wants an audience. Emma's fingers stilled. Charlotte continued. I am giving him one. By noon, Beatrice had confirmed that the divorce petition was filed and ready for service. The emergency corporate motion had been prepared. The board secretary, who had worked for Charlotte since the old days and had never liked Richard's habit of calling women sweetheart, had scheduled a special vote for the next morning pending evidence disclosure. But Charlotte had one more thing planned. A party is a story people attend in formal clothes. Richard had written his version. Charlotte had edited the ending. At 7 that evening, guests began entering the Grand Mirabelle Hotel. White roses covered the ballroom. The orchestra played soft jazz. Champagne moved through the room on silver trays. Charlotte greeted people with a smile that made them feel safe. She kissed cheeks. She accepted birthday wishes. She hugged former employees who remembered when Whitmore Development had rented 2 rooms above a bakery and Charlotte had answered phones while balancing payroll. George Bell, the retired operations chief, held both her hands. I heard rumors, he said quietly. Most rumors are underdressed truths, Charlotte replied. His mouth tightened. Tell me where to stand. Near the front, she said. He nodded once. At 7:42, Richard arrived with Ava. By 7:45, everyone knew. Ava did not behave like a guest. She behaved like a replacement, inspecting the furniture. She touched Richard's arm when speaking to donors. She laughed too loudly at stories she had not earned. She called him rich in front of men who had called him Mr. Whitmore for 20 years. Then she sat in Charlotte's chair. A staff member tried to correct it. Ava looked up with innocent eyes. Oh, Richard said this was my seat. Charlotte saw Oliver watching from across the room. His face had gone pale. Good, she thought. Some truths had to be seen in public before loyal sons stopped negotiating with them. Dinner began. Richard held court. Ava leaned close. Charlotte ate 3 bites of salmon and listened to the room tighten around her. At 8:30, the lights softened. A hotel manager brought Richard a microphone. Emma whispered, "This is it." Charlotte placed her napkin on the table. Richard stepped onto the small stage beneath the screen of family photographs. "Friends, partners, family," he began. "Thank you for joining us to celebrate Charlotte." Applause rose politely. Charlotte watched him with the strange clarity that comes when love has finally run out of places to hide. He spoke about their marriage, their children, their company, the early years, the sacrifices. He used the word we 6 times. Then his voice shifted. But life is not meant to stand still, he said. Growth requires courage. The future asks us to welcome new energy. Several people looked toward Charlotte. She kept her hands folded. Richard smiled at Ava. Ava, would you join me? Ava rose in red, glowing under the chandelier. The ballroom turned to ice. She walked to the stage slowly, savoring every step. Richard took her hand when she reached him. Emma whispered something that sounded like a prayer and a curse. Oliver stood halfway from his chair, then froze. Richard faced the room. Many of you know Ava Sinclair as a consultant, he said. But to me, she has become much more than that. She life. A gasp moved through the guests. Ava smiled. Richard lifted her hand. Charlotte stood. The entire ballroom turned. She did not hurry. She walked between tables, past the donors, past the employees, past her son, who looked as if someone had finally made him watch a house burn from inside. Richard's smile faltered. Charlotte, he said into the microphone, his voice suddenly too loud. She climbed the steps and held out her hand. The microphone, Richard. He stared. Ava's fingers tightened around his. Charlotte looked at the crowd, then, "It is only polite that I introduce mine." Richard did not move. Charlotte reached into her evening bag and withdrew a cream envelope. She placed it in his hand. The process server seated at table 12 stood up, adjusted his jacket, and said clearly, "Richard Alden Whitmore, you have been served." The sound that moved through the room was not a gasp. It was a fracture. Richard opened the envelope with stiff fingers. His face emptied. Ava leaned closer, saw the first page, and stopped smiling. Charlotte took the microphone from Richard's loose hand. "Those are divorce papers," she said. The ballroom fell into complete silence. Richard's lips parted. "Charlotte." She looked at him. "Do not worry," she said. "I am not finished." Miss Vale appeared at the edge of the stage before he could. She was small, silver-haired, and colder than January glass. 2 security officers stood behind her with the patience of men who had already been briefed. Richard saw her and went rigid. "Beatrice," he said, "this is a private family matter." Beatrice looked around the ballroom. "You brought it to a microphone." A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone coughed to hide a laugh and failed. Charlotte held up a second folder. "For 34 years, many of you have known me as Richard's wife," she said. "Some of you knew me before Whitmore Development had a sign on the door. Some of you remember when I wrote payroll checks from a folding table and used my grandmother's inheritance to guarantee the company's first loan." Former employees near the front nodded. George Bell called out, "We remember." Richard's face flushed. Charlotte continued, "What many of you do not know is that those guarantees were not gifts. They were converted into voting rights held by the Eleanor Caldwell Legacy Trust." Ava looked at Richard. "What does that mean?" Richard did not answer. Charlotte did. "It means I control 52% of Whitmore Development's." Face drained of color. Richard shook his head. "That is misleading." Beatrice opened her tablet. "It is filed with the state, acknowledged by the board, and signed by you in 2003, 2009, and 2017. Richard looked at her as if he wanted to tear the tablet in half. Charlotte turned to the screen behind her. The family montage disappeared. A spreadsheet appeared in its place. Ava Sinclair strategic image. Consulting fee. $85,000. Consulting fee. $120,000. Luxury travel. $46,200. Harbor penthouse lease. $168,000. Jewelry, executive relations expense. $31,700. Ava took one step back. Richard barked, "Turn that off." No one moved. The audiovisual technician had worked for Charlotte's foundation for 12 years. He adjusted his headset and looked straight ahead. Charlotte said, "These payments were made through company accounts under project development categories. Several were attached to proposals seeking trust-backed financing." Ava whispered, "Richard, you said those were personal." Richard turned sharply. "Be quiet." Unfortunately for him, the microphone was still close enough. The room heard every word. Ava's face changed from fear to fury. Charlotte let the moment breathe. Then she clicked the remote. A text message appeared. "Richard says red makes a woman impossible to ignore." Another. "I hope Saturday will not be too difficult for you. Change is easier when everyone accepts it gracefully." Ava stared at her own words on a 12-foot screen. Several women in the room looked at her with the cold disgust reserved for those who mistake cruelty for sophistication. Charlotte said, "Miss Sinclair was not merely involved in my husband's private life. Her company received undisclosed payments while she participated in strategy discussions regarding corporate restructuring and trust access." Richard found his voice. "You are twisting this because you are hurt." Charlotte turned toward him. "Hurt, yes. Confused, no." His jaw clenched. She clicked again. A document appeared. Family Governance Transition Plan. The highlighted sentence glowed on the screen. Charlotte's emotional attachment to the marriage can be leveraged during anniversary and birthday events to obtain ceremonial consent. This time, the gasp was sharp enough to cut. Oliver sat down as if his knees had failed. Emma covered her mouth. Richard's face went gray. Charlotte looked directly at her son before she spoke again. "This is why some things cannot be handled privately." Oliver's eyes filled with shame. Richard said, "That draft was never used." "Because I found it," Charlotte replied. Ava turned to him. "You told me she barely understood the company's structure." Richard's head snapped toward her. Again, the room heard. Charlotte almost thanked them both. There was a special efficiency in letting dishonest people panic near microphones. Beatrice stepped forward. "As of tonight, Ms. Caldwell Whitmore has exercised emergency vote. Mr. Whitmore is suspended from all executive authority, pending an independent audit. His company cards, building access, and signing privileges have been frozen. Ms. Sinclair's consulting contract is terminated effective immediately." Ava made a small sound. Richard stared at Charlotte. "You cannot remove me from my own company." Charlotte's eyes did not leave his. "It was never only yours." He tried to laugh. "Without me, Whitmore Development is nothing." George Bell stood from the front table. "That is not true, Richard." Heads turned. George's voice was rough with age and anger. "I watched Charlotte keep that company alive while you chased applause. I watched her cover payroll when your first hotel deal collapsed. I watched her talk suppliers out of lawsuits you never knew were coming because she did not want to embarrass you." Richard looked at him with betrayal. George did not soften. "You forgot who built the floor under you." The applause began with one table of former employees. Then another. Then the whole side of the room where the people who remembered sat together. Charlotte did not smile. This was not triumph yet. Triumph was clean. This still hurt. But the room was no longer watching a wife being replaced. It was watching a man lose the stage he's a way out. Charlotte could see it in his eyes. He had lost the crowd, but he had not yet lost the habit of command. Men like Richard treated consequences as negotiation openings. He reached for the microphone. Charlotte moved it away. "Enough, Richard." His face tightened. "You owe me the chance to explain." She looked at Ava, then at the ballroom. "You had a stage. You used it." Ava suddenly stepped forward, no longer elegant, no longer soft. The red dress that had looked like victory now looked like evidence. "I was told the marriage was over," she said, voice sharp. "Richard said you lived separate lives. He said you only appeared together for the company." Charlotte looked at the bracelet on Ava's wrist. "Did he also tell you to wear my jewelry?" Ava's hand flew to her wrist. Several guests whispered. Richard turned on Ava. "Stop talking." Ava stared at him. "No. You told me she was a figurehead." "A figurehead." The word passed through the room like smoke. Charlotte watched Oliver flinch. He was hearing, in one brutal evening, what his father had taught others to think of his mother. Ava continued, anger replacing performance. "You said the trust was old family money, and she would never challenge anything because she hated conflict." Richard's voice dropped. "Ava, you said after tonight, people would start accepting me." Emma stood. "Accepting you as what? My mother's replacement at her own birthday party?" Ava looked at Emma, and for the first time, shame almost crossed her face. "Almost." Then she lifted her chin. "Your father made promises." Emma laughed once, broken and furious. "He made vows first." That sentence landed harder than any document. Richard looked at their daughter. "Emma, do not speak to her that way." Emma's eyes filled. "You do not get to police my tone after making Mom watch this." Oliver rose slowly from his seat. "Dad," he said, "tell me the restructuring plan was fake." Richard closed his mouth. "Tell me you were not going to use Mom's birthday to pressure her into signing control away." Silence. Oliver's face collapsed. Charlotte hated that part. She had wanted Richard exposed, yes. She had wanted the company protected. She had wanted her dignity returned in the room where he tried to take it. But she had never wanted her children to watch their father become small. Richard took one desperate step toward Oliver. Son, business is complicated. Oliver stepped back. No. Do not do that. Do not make theft sound like strategy. Richard looked wounded, as if Oliver had betrayed him. That was Richard's gift. He could injure you and still stand there bleeding from your reaction. Beatrice checked her phone. The board has acknowledged receipt. The emergency vote is recorded. Security is prepared to escort Mr. Whitmore out if necessary. Richard heard her. His whole body stiffened. You would have me thrown out of my wife's birthday party? Charlotte looked at the room he had filled with witnesses. No, she said. I am having you removed from a company event funded by a trust you attempted to defraud. The distinction mattered. Richard looked around for allies. The investors avoided his gaze. The councilman studied his cufflinks. The banker who once laughed too loudly at Richard's jokes suddenly found the floral centerpiece fascinating. Only Ava still looked at him, and her expression was no longer adoration. It was calculation turning into fear. What happens to my contract? She asked. Richard stared at her. Ava, this is not the time. She gave a short laugh. Not the time? My name is on that screen. My company is in your payments. You promised legal protection. The room sharpened. Beatrice's pen moved. Richard saw it and went pale. Charlotte almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He had chosen a mistress with appetites similar to his own. Now she was hungry and cornered. Ava pointed at him. You said Charlotte would cry and leave. You said she was too proud to make a scene. Richard hissed, lower your voice. Ava raised it. You said after tonight, she would either sign or look bitter in front of everyone. There it was. The final nail, delivered by the woman who had worn Charlotte's bracelet. Charlotte turned back to the guests. I apologize to those who came expecting only a birthday celebration, she said. But I will not apologize for refusing to let my marriage be used as a business instrument. Dinner will continue for anyone who wishes to stay. The bar is open. The cake is excellent. And tomorrow morning, Whitmore Development begins its audit. A stunned pause followed. Then Rachel Donnelly, Charlotte's oldest friend, stood near the center table and lifted her glass. To Charlotte, she said. George Bell lifted his. To Charlotte. Emma lifted hers with tears running down her cheeks. To Mom. One by one, the room rose. Not everyone. Some people stayed seated, uncomfortable with dignity, when it cost them alliances. Charlotte noticed them too. But enough stood. Enough glasses lifted. Enough voices said her name. Richard looked around at the room he had expected to own. Charlotte watched him understand, finally, that influence was not the same as respect. Security escorted him out through the side doors. Ava followed after arguing with Beatrice for exactly 47 seconds and realizing every word was becoming more expensive. When the doors closed behind them, the orchestra remained silent. Charlotte turned to the band. Please, she said. Something lively. The first notes of an old swing song filled the ballroom. The absurdity of it almost broke her. Emma came to the stage and wrapped both arms around her mother. Charlotte held her tightly. Then Oliver approached. He looked younger than 40. Pale, shaken, stripped of every defense he had brought into the room. Mom, he said. I am so sorry. Charlotte touched his cheek. You wanted to protect what you thought was whole. I should have protected you. Yes, she said gently. You should have. He closed his eyes. She let the truth stand between them. Love did not require pretending wounds were smaller than they were. Then she pulled him into the embrace at Whitmore Development before 7 and found his key card dead. He called Charlotte 11 times. She did not answer. He called Oliver. Oliver did not answer either. That hurt Richard more. Charlotte knew because Richard left a voicemail accusing her of turning his children against him, as if public betrayal were a rumor she had invented at breakfast. Beatrice saved the voicemail. By noon, the audit team had sealed Richard's office. By 3, they had access to expense records, vendor contracts, and private approval logs. By the end of the week, they had found enough to widen the investigation beyond Ava. A consulting agreement for a shell company controlled by Richard's college friend. A land option purchased quietly, before a public redevelopment announcement. Private travel billed under community outreach. The affair had been the door. The room behind it was full of rot. Charlotte spent the first week moving between legal meetings and quiet rooms. People expected rage to carry her. It did not. Rage was bright and fast. What carried her was something steadier. The refusal to let Richard's betrayal become the most important fact about her. On the 4th day, Richard came to the house. The house sat behind iron gates on a stretch of oak-lined road outside Charleston. Richard had loved giving tours of it, pointing out the library, the wine room, the dock, the garden designed for Charlotte but chosen by him. He forgot, often, that the deed was held by the Caldwell Trust. Charlotte met him on the front steps with Beatrice standing inside the doorway. Richard looked terrible. His usually perfect white hair was uncombed. His shirt collar was open. The arrogance had not disappeared, but it had become desperate around the edges. "I need 5 minutes with my wife," he said. Charlotte's expression did not change. "Your wife filed for divorce." His jaw trembled. "Charlotte, please." That word sounded strange from him. Please had always been something Richard expected from others. She stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind her, leaving Beatrice visible through the glass. 5 minutes. Richard breathed hard, as if he had run there. "I made mistakes. You committed fraud." He flinched. "I never meant to hurt you like that." "Like that," she repeated. His eyes filled. Ava was nothing. Charlotte almost laughed. "Not because it was funny. Because it was late. She was important enough to put on my stage. I was stupid. You were cruel." He looked away. For 34 years, Charlotte had known his face better than any landscape. She knew the line between his brows when he calculated, the twitch near his mouth when he lied, the softening of his eyes when he wanted forgiveness before confession. That softening was there now. Once it would have moved her. Now it only informed her. "I loved you," he said. Charlotte folded her hands. "I believe you loved the version of me that solved your problems and asked for nothing visible in return. That is not fair." "Fair?" She looked toward the garden where their children had once hunted Easter eggs. "You brought another woman to my birthday party, sat her in my chair, and planned to use my humiliation as leverage." His face crumpled. "I do not know how I became that man." Charlotte was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I do. One permission at a time." He looked at her. "Every small lie you excused. Every payment you hid. Every time you watched me trust you and chose advantage anyway. People do not become strangers overnight, Richard. They practice." He had no answer. The wind moved through the oak trees. Somewhere behind the house, water knocked softly against the dock. Richard wiped his face with one hand. "Is there any way back?" Charlotte looked at the man she had married at 28, the man who had once cried when Oliver was born, the man who kissed flour off her cheek in a kitchen they could barely afford. She mourned him in that instant. Not the man before her, but the one she had believed in. "No," she said. One word. Quiet. Final. Richard closed his eyes. Charlotte stepped back toward the door. "Beatrice will speak with your attorney." "Charlotte." She paused. He swallowed. "What am I supposed to do now?" For decades, she had answered that question in 100 forms. Which loan to sign? Which client to call? Which employee to keep? Which apology to make? Which dinner to host? Which crisis to smooth before anyone knew it had existed? This time, she did not rescue him. Now, she said, "You live with yourself." Then tried to save herself in the press. It was predictable. Within days, an online magazine published a sympathetic piece about a younger woman manipulated by a powerful married executive. Ava wore a cream sweater in the photo, no red dress, no bracelet. She looked out a window as if regret had a preferred lighting scheme. Charlotte read the headline and closed the browser. Beatrice called 30 seconds later. "Do not react publicly." "I was not going to." "Good." Her former assistant sent us copies of messages. Ava knew more than she is admitting. Of course she did. The messages arrived by secure email. Ava asking whether Charlotte had voting power or only social influence. Ava suggesting the birthday party would be the cleanest emotional break. Ava writing, if she refuses to sign, make her look bitter. Older wives hate looking bitter. Charlotte sat very still after reading that one. Not because it surprised her. Because there was a particular kind of cruelty in women who believed aging made another woman disposable. Ava had not merely wanted Richard. She had wanted Charlotte erased in a way that made the erasure look natural. Charlotte forwarded the messages to Beatrice. Then she went to lunch with Emma. They sat at a small restaurant near the water. Emma wore no makeup and looked exhausted. "I keep thinking about her sitting in your chair," Emma said. Charlotte stirred her tea. "A chair is only wood unless you let it become a throne." Emma tried to smile. "That sounds like something Grandma Eleanor would say." She would have said it with more profanity. Emma laughed for the first time in a week. Then her face softened. "Are you really okay?" Charlotte looked through the window at the harbor. White sails moved slowly under a pale sky. "No," she said, "but I am intact." Emma reached across the table and took her hand. "The divorce took 10 months. Richard fought it first. Then the audit findings grew heavier. Investors withdrew support. The board removed him permanently. Whitmore Development restructured under interim leadership chosen by Charlotte and approved by the trust. The company survived. That mattered to Charlotte. Hundreds of employees had not betrayed her. Their mortgages and children's tuition did not deserve to burn because Richard mistook power for permission. Oliver joined the transition committee after asking Charlotte, formally and humbly, whether she wanted him there. She made him wait 2 weeks before answering. Not to punish him. To teach him that access to her trust, emotional or financial, was no longer automatic. When she finally said yes, she gave him one rule. You do not protect peace by protecting lies. Oliver nodded. I know that now. He proved it slowly. He stopped speaking for rooms before listening to the people harmed inside them. He apologized to Emma without excuses. He visited Charlotte on Sundays and cooked badly, which she accepted as both penance and entertainment. Richard moved into a rented condo after selling his personal holdings to satisfy settlement obligations. The man who once owned every room he entered now waited for permission to enter buildings that still bore the Whitmore name. Ava lost her contract, her penthouse, and eventually the glamorous network that had mistaken proximity to power for power itself. The bracelet was recovered through counsel and sold at auction. Charlotte used the proceeds to create a scholarship for women over 50 returning to school after divorce or financial abuse. Rachel called it the Red Dress Fund. Charlotte ate 1 year after the birthday party. Charlotte hosted another event. Not at the Grand Mirabelle. Not with chandeliers, reporters, or Richard's favorite jazz trio. This one took place in a renovated brick building downtown, the first completed project of the Whitmore Caldwell Women's Enterprise Center. The center offered legal workshops, small business grants, financial planning, and office space for women rebuilding after betrayal, widowhood, bankruptcy, or simply years spent being told they were too late. Charlotte stood near the entrance in a white suit, silver blonde hair loose around her shoulders. She looked softer than she had at the party, but not smaller. Emma arrived with flowers. Oliver arrived with coffee and no advice, which Charlotte considered growth. George Bell arrived with his cane and a folder of old company photographs. You should display these, he said. Charlotte opened the folder. There she was at 29, sitting at a folding table with a calculator, a phone tucked between ear and shoulder, baby Oliver asleep in a carrier under the desk. Richard stood beside a half-finished sign, smiling like a man already imagining the magazine cover. Charlotte touched the edge of the photograph. For years, she had looked at pictures like that and seen only what she had lost. Now she saw evidence. Not court evidence. Life evidence. She had always been there. Before the money looked impressive. Before the applause. Before the white roses and red dress. Before Richard mistook the spotlight for the source of the light. A young woman approached her near the grant table. She was maybe 30, holding a folder against her chest. Mrs. Whitmore? Charlotte smiled. Miss Caldwell is fine. The woman flushed. I just wanted to say thank you. My husband emptied our account before he left. I thought I was stupid for trusting him. Then I heard what you said in an interview about trust not being stupidity. I applied for the grant because of that. Charlotte's throat tightened. Trust is not stupidity, she said. Betrayal is not wisdom. The woman's eyes filled. Charlotte took her hand. What are you building? A catering company. Then let us talk about kitchens. Across the room, Emma watched her mother sit with the woman and lean over the business plan as if nothing in the world mattered more in that moment. Oliver stood beside her. She looks happy, he said. Emma considered it. No, she said. She looks free. That evening, after the event ended, Charlotte drove home alone along the water. The sky was turning lavender. The city lights blinked on one by one. At a red light, she saw a couple crossing the street, the man holding the woman's coat around her shoulders. For a second, an old ache moved through her. Not for Richard as he was at the end, but for the marriage she once believed she had. She let the ache pass through without inviting it to stay. Healing, she had learned, was not forgetting. It was remembering without handing the memory a knife. When she reached home, the house was warm with lamplight. No suits over chairs. No voice calling from another room. No performance waiting for her to applaud it. Just quiet. At first, quiet had felt like abandonment. Now it felt like ownership. She made tea, opened the back doors, and stood on the porch while the tide moved under the moon. A year earlier, Richard had brought her done that night. Only it was not his. Charlotte thought of the red dress, the stolen bracelet, Richard's face when the voting rights appeared on the screen. She thought of Oliver's apology, Emma's arms around her, George standing from the front table, glass lifted high. She thought of every woman who had ever been told to be graceful, while someone else stole her chair. Grace was not silence. Grace was not surrender. Grace was walking to the stage with steady hands and telling the truth without begging anyone to believe it. Charlotte lifted her tea toward the dark water in a private toast. To the woman she had been. To the woman who survived her. And to every woman who would one day discover that being replaced was sometimes just the painful beginning of being returned to herself. If you enjoy stories about betrayal, hidden power, public reversals, and women who reclaim their lives with calm strength, twist.